Okay, welcome back to our deity chart live streams. And this afternoon, we're going to discuss the Soma type god. And so this is a these are all such important deities. They all have uniqueness and key elements, but the Soma god is very central to this massive web of a certain part of the mythology. So the Soma god is very important. Um, for an easy jumping off point, you can picture potentially the god Dionysus, who we will also go into. So clearly an important god who has a certain gravitational pull to him, with a lot revolving around what he does. But key to this Soma type god, of course, is that he is the god of the sacred liquid. And so the Rig Veda, for example, um, has a lot to do with the Soma sacrifice. The Soma is this key element of the sacrifice. They were clearly doing Soma sacrifices very frequently, drinking a lot of sacred Soma that they were offering up and consuming. And so this is the god who quite literally embodies that sacred liquid. One of the questions that kind of lingers, and it was lingering even when I wrote about this in my book, is that Soma is the god of the sacred liquid fundamentally, but he also has a lunar quality to him, which seemingly becomes directly identified with the moon at some point, so that Soma becomes the moon god. But there's a separate moon god, um, and that moon god Chandra is Chandra, right? I'm just blanking, but I think in any case, Chandra and Soma become just equated as one, but they seem to be also treated separately at times. So the question is whether Soma was always the moon god, or esoteric spirit of the moon god, or if he was just god of sacred water, sacred liquid, which had a sort of underlying lunar quality, because um, waters and lunar and these sorts of things were aligned. And there is this underlying idea that there are these waters in the moon, in a sense, that the moon is like a container of the sacred waters. And so perhaps this god was seen as the god of those sacred lunar waters, who could could be conflated or identified with the moon itself or not in certain contexts. But it becomes an interesting question in the case of Dionysus, for example, who has lunar imagery, lunar symbolism, but is less directly treated or seen as the moon god, and even has solar sun identifications, sun symbolisms. Um, so there is this possibility that this Soma god, I think, is paradoxical, has a paradoxical lunar and solar sides to him, while at least in some branches being heavily lunar at the same time. For example, even we talked about last time how the Soma liquid, when poured into the waters, gets called the Gandharva of the waters, and that is in the Soma hymns of the Rig Veda itself, even. But then, even in those same hymns, after being called the Gandharva of the waters, it will be identified with Vivasvat, the sun god himself, as if when the Soma enters the waters, or when the Soma even is in the waters, primordially perhaps, because the Soma lurks in the waters in a way, as its sacred essence. But when it is in the waters, it is like this shining embryo in the waters. Therefore, it is esoterically identified with the sun, which is, canonically the shining embryo that emerges out of the waters. So you have this happening, this esoteric identification happening, even in the Rig Vedic hymns, in the Soma mandala. And so it is this underlying esoteric resonance that I just wanted to point to that, because we will draw a comparison between Soma of the Vedas and Dionysus, but there is this paradoxical quality sometimes, even if most oftenly I speak of Soma as the moon god or a moon god, and that is there in Dionysus. There's also this paradoxical solar qualities that come out, I think. So with that, I will bring up the Rig Veda hymn that we touched on last time, because this, in order to do the comparisons that I have suggested, you have to look at a very complex web of connections and layers of connections, unfortunately. But it is fascinating if you can follow along with what we are going to go into. So, as mentioned last time, and I'm just going to remove this here and add the hymn. Okay. All right. So back to Surya's bridal, or Surya's bridal. So this is again the wedding to the sun maiden, the daughter of the sun princess, Surya. And the implication, I think, is that many gods marry this goddess in different forms under different names. She is this shining bride. As we will see, this could connect to Skadi, who has the epithet the shining bride of the gods, I believe. And so you can kind of think of Surya in that way. She is the bride of the gods, plural, because she is passed between different gods. Yeah, she's not the same as Ushas, the dawn goddess, precisely. She's a different goddess in the Vedas, but another goddess of the shining light of the sun in a different capacity with a slightly different role here. So to draw our attention back to what we were talking about last time, we have verse 40. Soma obtained her first of all. Next, the Gandharva was her lord. And then Agni, a typo there, Agni was thy third husband. Now one born of woman is thy fourth. And so again, this is the framework that we see coming out even in the Vedic marriage rituals, with this sequence of ritual husbands that are the gods in this order: Soma, the Gandharva, Agni, and then the human spouse, the human husband. Let's see, and then one other thing. So this is one of the fundamental things in identifying the Soma god, is this concept of there is frequently a bride, like I mentioned with Skavi, who is married to the Soma type god, and then there will be a sequence of this was my theory in my book, that there's a sequence of 3 or 4 marriages. If you include the Ashvins as the fourth, they are the other wooers at the Soma's wedding here. They're sort of like go-between wooers, but also a sort of potential rival wooers. It's this sort of ambivalence. But in any case, you will have in the different branches these marriages, these couplings, and these potential wooing myths that are loosely or more closely connected to one another between these 3 types of gods. So to think of the Norse mythology, what I mean is that you have the marriage of Njordr and Skavi. You then have Skavi, who is directly passed as a wife to Odin, and we know that Odin is Agni. For one thing, he's Rudra and Agni, Rudra Agni. So in that capacity, I think that passing of that Skavi to Odin is is the passing of the solar bride between Soma and Agni. But then you have the Gandharva. I think this is like a separate story in the Norse mythology, which is Idun and Bragi. So we identified that Bragi is the Gandharva, and his consort is Idun, another goddess who has many solar qualities and connections. And once we identify Idun in this mix, we can see that some of her mythic motifs also mirror others, for example, in the Irish mythology, that can be connected into the sequence. So try to picture 3 marriages. First of all, the Soma god marrying a solar princess, an Agni type god marrying a solar princess, and the Gandharva type god marrying a solar princess. And when this shows up in the mythologies, there is often at least one direct transference of the same named goddess, as with Skadi, directly passing between 2 of them. And then the other, and it might happen in different ways and show up in different ways like that. And then there can be other ones where they show up as separate figures. For example, Freyr, if Freyr is the Ashvin god, then his wooing and marriage of Gerther appears to be downstream of this complex of wooing tales as well, but it is Gerther is presented separately. Idun is presented separately. And then drawing that back to the Celtic mythology, as we mentioned last time, Araun, the underworld god, is married to an unnamed goddess. Then Puith, who we've identified potentially as the Gandharva type, he sleeps in the bed under the semblance of Araun, sleeps in bed with Araun's wife for a full year, while preserving their virginity, while resisting doing anything untoward with the wife of Araun. And so he is in this Gandharvic role, precisely as we see in the Griya Sutras, which express this hymn with the Gandharva summit, the staff. So there is already a sort of transference of the wife between those two. But then furthermore, in this hymn, it says, it speaks directly to the, here it is, verse 22. So it speaks directly to the Gandharva, who's called Visvavasu, as we mentioned last time. This is the name of the Gandharva in the hymn. It says, rise up from hence, this maiden hath a husband. I laud Visvavasu with hymns and homage. Seek in her father's home another fair one, and find the portion of old assigned thee. Rise up from hence, Visvavasu. With reverence we worship thee. Seek thou another willing maid, and with her husband leave the bride. So again, this is preserving, the bride. You could picture this with Puith. He's preserving, leaving alone the bride of Araun there. And then it says, rise up from hence. It's telling him, in a sense, find another from her father's home. The father is the sun god himself. So another from her father's home would theoretically be another sun princess, right? Another emanation of the same, like Surya, another solar princess. And what do we see Puith do? But he goes and immediately encounters Rhiannon, who is another solar goddess, who I mentioned. That myth, that story of Puith finding Rhiannon, actually parallels many details from Samvarana finding and marrying Tapati, who is the daughter of Vivasvat, the sun god, once again. So she may be another name of this solar goddess in some sense. Okay, so you see what I'm saying? You have the things in this hymn seeming to be expressed, at least in some way, partly perhaps, in even the Celtic branches, Germanic branches, Norse branches, etc. And so after Puith marries Rhiannon, he then dies, and who takes Rhiannon as husband and wife? Who marries Rhiannon after Puith but Manawydan? Okay, Manawydan aka Mannanon, is the Agni type. So you see a direct passing there from Puith, the Gandharva, of his solar bride. He dies, and the bride, Rhiannon, passes directly to none other than the fire god, the Agni type, Manawydan. Okay, so I would argue that that is once again illustrating this sequence by a direct transfer, this time between the Gandharva type and the Agni, just as in verse 40, you have next the Gandharva was her lord, and then Agni was thy third husband. So that second portion of the transference from the Gandharva to Agni seems to be what is happening with Rhiannon. I would argue. So I think there's more complexities to this. There may be other elements being combined into these hymns or into these stories, conflations. There is some sort of, we mentioned the Vivasvat and Saranyu mythos that seems to be hovering around and perhaps being combined in the Rhiannon stuff. But anyways, try to picture these 3 to 4 marriages and how you will see a transference oftentimes of one of the brides between, at least at one point in this sequence, and then other times they can appear under separate names. If you kind of can picture that concept, I think it is sort of a key to decode what is happening in some of the myths, because this pattern repeats strikingly, I think. And the last thing I'll say is that transference seems to also be the case with, as we'll see, Mither is the Gaelic parallel of Araun, the Gaelic parallel of Soma. He woos and marries Aideen, and then we see that Oma, the bard of the gods, who would be the Gandharva type, as you said, Oma just happens to have as one of his consorts Aideen, very, very strangely. And all the details of that aren't clearly told, but it's right there. You have a potential passing between Mither, the Soma god, to Oma, the Gandharva of Aideen, who is this Surya parallel. Okay, so that should lay the groundwork of what we're going to talk about. Now let's read a little bit about Dionysus. If Josephus is ready to do that, we could go into a couple of the hymns, if that's
Of course,
right.
I can. I think that the first thing to look into is actually not any of the hymns, and as you can probably see from my screen, there are a lot of hymns that we could look at. But actually, the first mention of the marriage of Dionysus in the Odyssey, in the 11th book of the Odyssey. So we have Odysseus, who has descended into the underworld and is having this sort of procession of souls of famous women who appear to him. And one of these women is Ariadne, so the wife of Dionysus. And it's very interesting because we see some very compressed version of the myth that we have also seen in the hymn of Surya's bridal and in its Germanic and Celtic parallels. So Ariadne, the daughter of the evil-minded Minos, whom Theseus led away from Crete into the Gulf of Holy Athens, but he did not have sex with her. Literally, he did not enjoy her, but it's clearly implying intercourse. And then we have another interesting sentence. Artemis killed her beforehand in the holy island of Dia, which is surrounded by water on both sides, because of Dionysus' testimony. Now, this is not really clear because we do not have, as far as I know, many other attestations of this supposed testimony. But the idea is pretty simple. Ariadne was probably supposed to be married to Dionysus since the beginning. She ran away with Theseus, and they run away in a fashion that is resembling a wedding ceremony, right? In the European weddings, especially for the warrior class, we know that the husband simulated kidnapping the bride and it's possible that in prehistoric times it was an actual kidnapping of the bride. Um, and then they were supposed to consummate their marriage and eventually get it ratified socially. So Ariadne and Theseus have this sort of bridal abduction, but then they do not consummate, and Ariadne is killed by Artemis. Now, Artemis is really interesting here. Obviously, Artemis, as the twin sister of Apollon, uh, could be understood as a sort of female Apollon, right? Apollon is known to kill men and Artemis to kill women, uh, either with what is called their painless arrows, so probably some form of illness, or in Artemis' case, specifically childbirth. Death by childbirth was pretty common in antiquity. We do have an alternate version of the myth much later on. I think it's in Pausanias, in which Ariadne does in fact die giving birth to twins. So it's a possibility that even Homer already had this sort of situation in mind. So I think that Artemis placed in this context could possibly be a very loose parallel to Agni. So the idea of this Rudra or Agni type of deity being somehow involved in a marriage succession, even though not in this case as a husband or as a suitor in any capacity. Now, Dionysus' witness probably means that Dionysus was the one who told Artemis to kill Ariadne. And this could make Dionysus appear particularly cruel, or at any rate, it could appear as something that would terminate Dionysus' relationship with Ariadne. But actually, if we go reading Hesiod, we know that Dionysus actually descended into the underworld, took Ariadne back, and ensured that she would have both immortality and eternal youth. So she became a goddess fully, right? Unlike maybe Tithonus, who becomes only immortal but not eternally youthful, and so is kind of doomed to eternal suffering because of this. So I would say that this is the a very condensed version of this marriage succession. Ariadne as the daughter of the sun. Now, specifically, we do know that Ariadne's grandfather on her mother's side is the sun, like the literal sun god Helios.
Yes.
It's also possible that Minos has some parallels with the sun. I wouldn't want to go too deep into that because it will definitely take too much time. But both Minos in Greek mythology and the sun in Vedic mythology are known to be judges of souls in the underworld. So it's possibly something that still reinforces this parallelism.
I do think I did want to mention this as well, but that it can be the grandfather is the son. I think that's perfectly consistent with the pattern. We see this with the Sukanya, who I will hopefully mention later as well. So it doesn't have to be the father is the son. It could be the grandfather. But like you said, it could also be the grandfather is the son, and then the father is an incarnation of the son as well. It could be something like that.
Yeah, it's a possibility. At any rate, I do think that the parallel is pretty clear. Like we have Ariadne, Theseus in the role of the Gandharva, just as the Gandharva is supposed to marry Surya, but not to consummate with her. And then we have this sort of Artemis insertion that could be paralleled by Agni, even though it's developed in a really different way. And then finally, her reunion with Dionysus, this time as a goddess. So in some way, she upgrades her position.
Okay. Well, actually, yeah, no, that I could see that being like a compressed version unto itself, because sometimes these traditions are localized. There's going to be multiple variants, so that could be like a compressed version. One thing I did want to argue is, like I mentioned, sometimes these are connected together into a tightly connected story cycle where it's directly the bride is directly passed, but other times it can appear as separate under separate names. So one thing I explored in my book is that we do have the graces. Okay, so the graces or the is it Charites? How do you pronounce that, Josephus?
I would pronounce it Charites.
Charites. Okay, thank you. So they are. They have even been linguistically, phonetically connected, theoretically, to the horses of the sun god in Vedic material, because the name is actually similar. But in any case, the graces appear in sort of groups of multiple goddesses who have potential resonances with this. And what we find is that Hephaestus marries one of the graces, and Hermes, the Gandharva, marries one of the graces, Pytho, I believe. And so this could be also a separate sort of manifestation of that marriage to the actual fire god Hephaestus, and then the actual Gandharva, Hermes, but more like separated off into their own marriage stories, potentially, at least. So that could complete the circle there. The other thing about Ariadne, so yeah, I definitely think what you're saying is accurate, in that she is the Surya parallel, the clearest one, at least. Like the graces could be another one. They can appear kind of multiply, but Ariadne is like the clearest case. And what's interesting is that Mither, because he creates jealousy by bringing Aideen home, he already has a wife, Fuavnach, and she's like an evil sorceress, or a terrifying sorceress. She may be a goddess. I don't want to say whether she's evil or not. She's presented sort of a wicked sorceress deity, and Mither creates jealousy by bringing Aideen home and as his new wife, and Fuavnach then turns her into a kind of fly, and as a fly, she has to go on this sort of long journey, this long Odyssey of sorts, and ultimately she gets she lands in someone's drink, a woman's drink, and is drunk again, and then is reborn finally as Aideen. So there's the possibility, because actually I do know, and I reference this in my book, there is a similar thing with Dionysus and Ariadne, where there is a jealousy between two of his wives, including Ariadne. And then we have, like you said, the death of Ariadne, but she's reborn as, a goddess of sorts. Did you say a goddess or just an immortal? But in any case, this could, like a higher improved form, this could be paralleled by what's happening to Aideen in the Gaelic story, where she undergoes a kind of death. She's turned into a fly and then is drunk in a drink, and has to undergo a serious transformation, and she's reborn. And arguably, this connects to the process of even the purification of the Soma itself, esoterically, I think. But we can maybe get into that more deeply at some point. What do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, when you were talking about the localized versions of the myths, Ariadne was probably specific to Crete and to Athens originally. So yes, it's definitely possible that other regions of Greece had their own sort of homologues to that story that we should be looking into. It's also very interesting that Ariadne was identified at some point in some local cults with Aphrodite. Now, obviously, this is not really fitting with our reconstruction of Aphrodite versus Ariadne, but it could make sense if we consider the Charites as being somehow identical with Ariadne. Obviously, the Charites are closely associated with Aphrodite, so maybe that could be the missing link that allowed this identification to take place. Although obviously other possibilities are there, maybe some Mesopotamian syncretism to some degree, although I would take it with a pinch of salt, as always. So there's definitely a lot that we could investigate more. Obviously, not too much can be done within a single live stream.
Yes. No, those are fascinating possibilities. So, did you have more of this hymn you wanted to go into?
Well, this one passage of the Odyssey is pretty much over. Like then he goes on to talk about other characters that are not interesting to us. So I think we can have a quick look at the other hymns of Dionysus, starting from the Homeric hymns. We have at least three, and two of them are more concerned with his nativity, his birth, and another one is concerned with his kidnapping by Tyrrhenian pirates. Now, the kidnapping myth, I'm not sure it's too relevant to the kind of things that we're discussing mainly in this stream. It could possibly be related to the usual stories about the Soma or the meat of poetry being stolen, but it's probably something that we should delve into at another time, or more specifically, I think we're kind of going to focus on the marriage sequence and lunar associations, solar associations, and other things that we've mentioned already. So, well, really, once again, interestingly, relating to the moon to the moon influences and the moon associations, moon is obviously associated with water, and in fact, we do have this Homeric hymn to Dionysus, suggesting that Dionysus was conceived by a river, the river Alpheus. So probably it's once again an allusion to the water nature of Dionysus. I would say that as a rule of thumb, Dionysus could be understood as a sun god within the waters. This is kind of the theology
Right.
that has been handed down to us, right? Obviously, waters are the domain of the moon, so this would explain why Dionysus also has plenty of lunar symbolism on top of the solar symbolism that the ancients were so happy to acknowledge.
Exactly.
So obviously, the interesting thing here is that obviously he's conceived by this adulterous union between Semele and Zeus. So he has to be hidden from Zeus' wife Hera. This is kind of a staple in Greek mythology. Um, and so he's hidden in Nuse. Now, I'm kind of torn on this Nuse. This is supposed to be the birthplace of Dionysus, and some people have explained Dionysus' name from this place name, right? As if he were the Zeus born in Nuse. I suspect it's a back formation. So Nuse was extracted from the name of Dionysus in an attempt to explain a name that was no longer understood in classical Greek. I think it's a possibility. So, at any rate, basically, other interesting things about this hymn. Well, definitely, it's interesting that it's already mentioning the Trieteris. The Trieteris is a ritual that is performed every 2 years, but in the Greek counting, this means once every 3 years. Like the ancient Greeks counted inclusively and not exclusively, like we do. This is really important because we do see this sort of ritual also in the Orphic hymns. So even if Orphic hymns are obviously much later than anything we could associate to Orpheus, and probably much later than Homeric hymns, they still seem to have been conceived within this tradition very solidly, and probably for temple usage. So obviously we do see continuity in whichever temple produced the Orphic hymns, possibly the one in Pergamum, and whatever we had in archaic Greece in the times of Homer. Then some other interesting things I see. For instance, the epithet of Dionysus is literally going mad for women. this is uh, this is very interesting. I mean, it does obviously relate to the Maenads, so the women who form Dionysus' entourage and who usually dance in very inappropriate manners and sometimes slaughter animals alive. So it's also possibly to be understood in the opposite sense. Dionysus is the one who makes the women mad, even though the same word usually means mad for women in other passages, for instance, in the Iliad. Uh, and then another interesting thing at the end of the hymn is the fact that Semele, the mother of Dionysus, is also given another name, which is Tuone. This name is obviously derived from Tue, which means sacrifice, and it's generally understood to be the name that Semele has in the moment in which she's accepted as a goddess, right? So Semele is a human, obviously, in the story. She, in the traditional account, she is killed by the fire of Zeus in the act of conceiving Dionysus. There is also the whole Baroque story about her promise. She basically uses Zeus' promise to fulfill any of her wishes, to ask to see Zeus' true form, and obviously this results in her death, even though Zeus warned her not to wish for that, basically. So Tuone would be the same Semele, but taken into heaven and immortalized, just like Ariadne. I think it's very interesting that at least two women in this mythological story, so in relation to Dionysus, are immortalized. It might allude to something like the Soma's virtue, the ability of the Soma plant and the Soma ritual to make humans elevated beyond their mortality. But it might be, a slippery slope of speculation. I wish we had more information about much of these things, especially about Bacchic mystery cults that obviously were pretty much mystery. We also have another hymn that pretty much deals with the same issues. So I don't think we need to go too deeply into that. It's still about the conception of Dionysus.
Did you say what Nusa would mean? I remember reading Carl Kareni's book, and I think he connected it to like the gaping of the earth when Hades abducts Persephone. I think he was connecting even the name of Dionysus to that concept. Is that anything that you recall? Like, does it mean anything related to that gaping opening or anything?
I do not remember anything of this sort. I'm pretty sure that some speculation has been made. We can probably look up etymological attempts. I'm not sure of how trustworthy they are and how well accepted. It's possible that some of them are more on the speculative side. Also, one of our commenters is asking, where is Nusa supposed to be? Well, the real answer is that their sources have different proposals. So Georgia is one, another one is Egypt or somewhere near Egypt. So it's probably not settled. It's like Olympus, the Mount Olympus, is not clearly identified with any mountain. There are many claimants to being Mount Olympus. Probably trying to give a geographical definition of this place should be taken with a pinch of salt, as always. It's obviously myths about something that happens metaphysically. So every physical location is just trying to pinpoint into the physical world something that actually happens metaphysically. I'm seeing here attempts to explain Nusa in ancient sources. One ancient source claims that it's just an ancient word for tree. So that kind of, I don't know. Another one claims that it's a word for ivy. So these are attempts to explain Nusa, but I mean, trees are pretty generic.
Yes.
Ivy was specifically associated with Bacchus, Dionysus. So maybe they're just a posteriori explanations for this name.
Sounds like it, but who knows? Okay, so so that pretty much sums up the hymns then, or is there something important you wanted to go into in the next?
I mean,
can move on.
It sums up the Homeric mentions of this deity. We have pretty much everything Homeric that we can have here. I think we could go on to the Orphic hymns, right?
Sure, sure.
So they are very many, so I won't be going
Yes, just
really deeply
yeah.
into any of them.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if you were saying something
Uh,
here.
yeah, nothing. I was just saying, yeah, just choose the best ones that you were gonna go to, and yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so about the Orphic hymns, there are 7 Orphic hymns dedicated to Dionysus, and there are additional hymns dedicated to deities who are identified with Dionysus. So rather than trying to go deeply into each one of them, what I really think is important is trying to understand why would the authors of the Orphic hymns, that as we said every time, are probably priests, possibly from the Temple of Pergamum, but definitely associated with ritual activity. So definitely people who were not just composing literary hymns for the sake of literature; they were actually doing them for the sake of ritual. So why would they need so many hymns for this deity, right? A possible explanation has been provided by an Italian philosopher during the Renaissance. He's Del Diaceto. He's also known as Il Paonazzo. This philosopher was a disciple of Marsilio Ficino. So, obviously, if anyone of you knows, Ficino was a Catholic priest who practiced Orphic rituals in the spare time. So, definitely an interesting character. And Diaceto's interpretation is that these hymns refer to different planetary and celestial spheres. So here in front of me and in front of you, we have the hymn to the form of Dionysus known as Lycnites, which means the god of the winnowing fan, right? And according to Del Diaceto, this is supposed to be the lunar form of this god, so associated with the sky of the moon, the first level of heaven in traditional cosmology. This hymn is interesting, in my opinion, because it talks about especially the birth of Dionysus in a different way compared to the birth of Dionysus that we have seen in Homeric hymns. So Homeric hymns have a mortal woman, Semele, giving birth to Dionysus. In this version, especially in the highlighted line, we see that the mother of Dionysus is Persephone, so a goddess, right? This is pretty much typical of Orphism. It's probably something to look into. Persephone, I mean, in my opinion, looks pretty much like Yami in Vedic mythology. There's probably more to say. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen Yami or any equivalent figure as the mother of the Soma god, for instance. So maybe we should try to understand why Persephone was chosen as the Orphic mother of Dionysus. Obviously, she's also associated with the moon, so this explains why this hymn is regarded as the hymn of Dionysus in relation to the moon. Then we have another hymn, the hymn of Dionysus, Lucios Leonaios. Now, Lucios means the one who solves or who frees. So he's the god who frees us from the limitations of our nature. Leonaios is a typical epithet of wine, so it's just pretty Bacchic. And this was interpreted by Del Diaceto as referring to Dionysus in the sphere of Mercury, the second heaven. Then we have Prieterikos, so the form of Dionysus who is venerated um, every 3 years, which are 3 years in the Greek way of counting, or 2 years in the modern day English way of counting. We have noticed the word Prieteris in the Homeric hymn, so it's once again pretty traditional. And you can see in this hymn the importance, for instance, of Eros, the god of love, and this is possibly one of the reasons why this was interpreted by Del Diaceto as the hymn of Dionysus in the sphere of Venus, the third heaven in traditional cosmology. Then we have associated to the sphere of the sun, um, the hymn associated to Silenus, who is basically the mentor of Bacchus, but loosely identified with Bacchus himself. I'm really not sure what drew this interpretation in Del Diaceto's mind or in his sources. It's possible that he was ultimately drawing from Pleathon as well, but definitely interesting. This hymn is basically describing the whole collectivity of the Bacchic entourage. We also see the Soma god in India, who is constantly surrounded by Gandharvas, which are partly human shaped and partly beast shaped, and are understood as being intermediates between humankind and gods. And so in the same way, we have Bacchus, Dionysus, surrounded by so many deities, nymphs, satyrs, entities which are somehow mediators between humankind and this deity specifically, and deities in general. So it kind of fits well with our traditional Indo-European understanding of Dionysus and the Soma god. Then we have another hymn to Dionysus Bassareus. Bassareus means the one who is wearing a fox hide, and it's understood to be a warrior kind of clothing. So it's obviously associated to the sphere of Mars, of the fifth heaven in traditional cosmology. Then to the sphere of Jupiter, we have associated in Del Diaceto the hymn to Sabazius. Now, this deity is pretty interesting. He's pretty much identified with Zeus in his capacity as Bacchus' father, who sews his son into his thigh. So we could probably discuss the birth of Dionysus and the premature birth, especially in an Indo-European context. Obviously, it's all in the book and elsewhere, but it's also somehow identified with Bacchus himself. So it's counted among the hymns of Bacchus. Then we have the last planetary sphere, the sphere of Saturn, associated to the hymn to Dionysus Ampietes. Now, Ampietes means in Greek worship every 2 years. In practice, it's to be understood as worshipped every year, once again, with our inclusive or exclusive forms of counting. So, Ampietes associated with the sphere of Saturn. In fact, we do see words such as chronos, so the idea of time, and the cyclicity of time, which are addressed in the hymn, and so they obviously are pretty obviously related to the sphere of Saturn, and also association with the earth. Chtonion means earthly or underworldly, and so it's obviously still relating to Saturn's other aspect uh, as a god of things that are buried deep down, right? The god of depths. Then we go beyond planetary spheres and we go into the heaven of fixed stars with the hymn to Dionysus Erybromon. Erybromon means the one who shouts loudly, possibly referring to ritual kind of shouting. And he is obviously called Ewastera, so the one who has a good star. And this is probably why Del Diaceto thought of it as a hymn associated to Dionysus in the heaven of fixed stars. And it's very interesting because this hymn explicitly identifies Dionysus with the protogonon. Well, here it says protogonon, or we could have protogonon. As we said already in the other stream, it's possible to interpret the name in different ways depending on the accent. But at any rate, it's the primordial deity that we all know and that we made already a stream about. So he's identified with Dionysus. It's probably interesting to see, possibly it kind of frames the Soma liquid, or in Greek tradition, wine, as a sort of condensed version of this universal primordial deity, right? Um, then it also goes on about how this deity is secretive and obviously esoteric, impossible to talk about openly, and how he has an ambiguous nature. This could be understood in many ways, but at any rate, it's also a description of protogonon. So, I mean, take it how you want. Um, And then, well, obviously, we have more generic epithets, once again alluding to his birth and to his association with bulls. Bulls also have some sort of lunar symbolism, so they still fit within our known imagery. And then, once again, an allusion to the birth story from Persephone. And then we get to our final hymn to Dionysus among the Orphic hymns, which is associated with Dionysus as a universal deity, even beyond the heaven of fixed stars. And in this context, he's invoked with the epithet Perikionios, which means basically the god surrounding the pillar. And so this could be an allusion to the word tree or word pillar, word column, how we want to frame it. And so pretty much identifying Dionysus even higher up than with the primordial deity, all the way up to basically what we could describe as a sort of Brahma type or
Did you
Brahman
say
type.
did you say surrounding the pillar? Like, is it an image of vines, like ivy or grapevines, or is it
Yeah,
not surrounding like that?
it's definitely a possibility that it alludes to ivy or to wine grapes. Peri literally means around, surrounding. So I
Interesting.
mean, or going around in circles,
Okay.
basically, right?
Okay.
So yeah, it could be understood as an ivy around a tree. We do have ancient texts that describe ivy being wrapped around. Or even vine being wrapped around trees such as the olive tree. So it could be very well a Bacchic imagery. I am also kind of imagining a serpent around a tree or
Hmm.
around a column, right? It could be
Right.
understood in this way as well. And so obviously this kind of gives us insight into the theology of the Orphic hymns and shows how this deity Dionysus is understood in a very deep cosmic level, ultimately identified with the highest possible deity, which is obviously fitting for hymns that are supposed to be esoteric, maybe not secret, otherwise we wouldn't have them today, but definitely supposed to be used inside the temple for probably nocturnal workings. Usually rituals done at night were esoteric, whereas the ones done during the day were exoteric, right? So this might also very well match our understanding of Vedic Soma. Soma is obviously identified with plenty of other deities, and he's
Mhm.
possibly identified with even with the highest deities. I think Varuna is closely associated to Soma. Rudra is as well. So we
Yeah.
kind of see the importance, especially esoterically, of this deity, even though obviously exoterically we should be careful to distinguish what is Soma, Dionysus, and what is maybe, I don't know, Prajapati, Protagonist.
Yeah. Yeah. On that point, I will say, yeah, I've mentioned before that there is one of Rudra's hymn. There's only a couple Rudra hymns in the Rig Veda, and one of them is to Rudra hyphen Soma. So like a combination, like they're a dual. They like to do this in the Vedas. But in any case, they're paired in some kind of combined way that is hard to pinpoint, but it shows kind of the two sides. The Soma is obviously less of a harsh, less of a severe destroyer side. So if you have Soma and Rudra paired in a compound like that, Soma kind of is the more beneficent seeming side between them. Um, Also interesting though that Dionysus, for example, in Euripides, it can be a rather harsh god as well. So that's interesting to see. He has Dionysus has a sort of harsh, whether it's a Rudraic side to him. It could be. It's a good question. Also, like you said, Soma is very much one of the main gods who is identified with Prajapati himself. So Prajapati is like the totality god who is protogonos, um, but Prajapati is identified directly with, for example, Agni, but also Soma very prominently, and then also, for example, Vayu and Savitar. These are like primary faces or epithets of that totality god, but they become sort of emanated essences. But it is very much true that Soma is one of the primary faces of Prajapati. Also, in the Rig Veda, uh, there are only two gods, at least before Book 10, before the last layer. There are only two gods who are given an epithet that is a form of the name Prajapati. I think it's I'm forgetting exactly. I don't want to misquote it, but there's a form of the word that is Prajapati is formed on, and it is applied to. It is an epithet or an adjective describing Soma and Savitar. So those are again two of the most prominent sort of faces of Prajapati, and they themselves are given an adjective that is a form of the name Prajapati, essentially. The other interesting point is that Soma is the essence of the waters, even the primordial waters that characterize the uncreated plenum, in a sense. So Rudra, of course, is trying to keep the uncreate plenum intact, which is all the gods, it's all the totality, the unity, the pre-divided unity of all. But it is characterized as like an ocean of Soma and light, light and Soma, and it can be described in other ways paradoxically too, as. But in any case, Soma, it is like an ocean of a plenum of sacred liquid as well, and that is the Soma. So it is the essence of the uncreate. So when you drink the Soma that has descended on earth, it's like you are drinking a drop of the essence of the absolute, of the pure, the sacred, and so you're having an epiphany that connects you back to the essence of that perfection, in a sense. So it gave me an image of, you said, the revolving around the cosmic pillar. Dionysus is described as, this is probably not what they're describing, but there is sort of an image of the sort of absolute unmanifested pillar, and with maybe the waters or something, or even the airs or something, revolving around that pillar. Does this seem like a coherent esoteric sort of image to picture of the absolute as the world pillar, and then like the waters revolving around it, in a sense? I wonder if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think it does, especially if you think that waters are the feminine element,
That's
right?
what I mean,
So
exactly.
we usually see the feminine element going around the masculine element, just like
Precisely.
the moon is around the earth, right? It's kind of the same concept. Uh, and
Yeah,
the pillar could be understood as a masculine fire element.
exactly.
So there you have the fire who is always striving upwards, and the water who is kind of drooling around and moving in circles and always
Uh-huh.
changing her shape.
Uh-huh.
And this could be understood, yeah, also as the Shiva and Shakti,
Exactly. That's kind of,
or
yeah.
yeah, which in Greek philosophy would be energeia, which basically is the act in
Mhm.
English philosophical jargon, and dunamis, which in English is translated as potency.
Mhm.
It could also be translated as virtue, but virtue also has plenty of other meanings. So I would say potency is more appropriate.
Okay. Yeah. So and then of course the waters and the pillar, in an even higher unity beyond our comprehension, are one, in a sense. It is, so it's not to say they are absolutely separate, but there's these esoteric images you can conjure up, at least. And then
Yeah,
of course there's the paradox that the waters symbolically are feminine, they have the feminine aspect and embody that, but then Soma is somehow this masculine god who is embodying the essence of those waters, in a masculine kind of, sort of the shining essence of them. He is bringing them into focus in a way. So that's interesting as well.
yeah. I think that on the topic of the fire and the water being one, an interesting thing is that Orphic hymns also have another deity, Misa, who is basically said to be both masculine and feminine. So it's probably an allusion to this kind of situation. Shiva also has a partially masculine, partially feminine form. So it's always recurrent, right? The male and the female are never two blocks who cannot be compenetrated, but they are esoterically deeper down, just the same thing.
Yes. Yes, very interesting. All right, is there any other last mentions you wanted to do on the hymns, or should we go to the next
Yeah, I
aspect?
think the hymns are have pretty much said everything that they need to say.
Okay.
I do think that there's probably more to bring up, maybe on the topic of how Bacchic rituals were performed, and how they could be compared to the Vedic Soma ritual. I'm not sure if this has been studied already by anyone. We do have a very interesting study by Weiss, like Weiss, who compares the Vedic Soma ritual to the structure, obviously, of this ritual to the Roman ritual in honor of the Deity, which is probably to be understood as the same as Ceres, the goddess of fertility. It's very interesting, but obviously the rituals of Deity have nothing like the Soma liquid, whereas Greek mystery cults are pretty much centered around holy substances. Let's say wine in the case of Dionysus. In earlier times, it was probably mead rather than wine. And then we also have other rituals in honor of Demeter, in which we have kykeon, which is a sort of mixture of cereals with some parasites and other ingredients instead of the holy liquid, but we still have some sort of holy liquid that kind of channels the divine energy, or the well, energy is a pretty
Mhm.
modern word. I would say the divine potency, going back
Right.
to what we said earlier about dunamis
Right.
into
One
the ritual.
Yes, one image that I like that from the myths that could be, an after image of the ritual of the soma of the wine of Dionysus's wine, essentially, is when so Hephaestus, and you can maybe refresh my memory if I get any of these details wrong. I'm just drawing this up right now, but Hephaestus um, traps Hera in a device. It's a trap chair. I think because she threw him to earth, because he was unwanted or whatever. Anyways, he traps um, Hera in this wondrous. He's the smith, and so he can make this fantastic chair that traps Hera. Um, but then Dionysus. So Hephaestus is also the god of the fire, though. So he, in a sense, is a god of the sacred fire, or at least potentially so. And they have to, the gods want to have Hera released from this trap. So um, Dionysus gets Hephaestus drunk, so that Hephaestus will go, so that he can carry or wheel he wheelbarrows Hephaestus back to Mount Olympus, where I think that's where Hera is, and has him release Hera from the chair, essentially. But this is an image, theoretically, of Dionysus is the wine. He is the giver, and he is the wine itself. So he is like pouring the sacred liquid into Hephaestus, who is the sacred fire, so that it will go to heaven. So it will go to Mount Olympus to then free the goddess, so she can do her work to aid the world, which is essentially the structure of what we see with sacrifice, but related in this somewhat semi-comical myth, where Dionysus gets the fire god drunk with the sacred liquid, so it can go to the mountain of the gods and free the goddess. Yeah, so she can give her boons to the world and continue her work. Yeah, did I tell that story right?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting what you said. And I would also like to add that Hephaestus is a god of the fire, of course, but specifically of the earthly fire, the fire who is under the earth. Just
Ah,
as
yes.
Dionysus is to be understood as the sun who is under the waters, right? So there's this kind of different versions of the sun, different versions of the fire god, and so on, right?
Mhm.
So fire under the earth could esoterically mean the divine principle, the principle of this sort of non-dual unity and perfect solar kind of connotation, being enslaved by matter, being limited, being dimmed by matter. So, how I would interpret this myth is specifically Dionysus taking this divine principle out of this misery, out of this imprisonment within the earth, within the realm of death and of decay and of generation, in which spirituality and truth are kind of dimmed and obscured, and taking it back into Olympus, so back into the realm of the gods. And bringing it back onto Olympus also happens to free the divine potency, which is here represented by Hera, a goddess of the years, and in general, as every female deity, she's representing potency. She's also representing or alluding to the human soul to some degree. So if we can take through the Bacchic ritual the fire out of his earthly prison, we would also have, as a bonus side effect,
Mhm.
to have a freedom of the divine potency or the soul who was previously imprisoned by the fact that the fire itself was imprisoned, right?
Right. Well said. Yes. Yes. Thank you. Okay. So I just want to quickly go through the some of the connections. So part of what I want to do is touch on a couple of justifications for the parallels as well. So we've laid a lot of good esoteric readings and a lot of the foundations, but I'd like to go back to some of the parallels. And so the key figure for this whole parallel of the Soma type, in my opinion, is this legendary figure in Vedic mythology called Chyavana. So a very mysterious figure. And one of the issues is there are many hymns to Soma in the Rig Veda and in the Vedas, but there's actually not a lot of sort of narrative mythology about him other than this marriage hymn that I described, and then just basically the concept that's repeated over and over again in the Soma hymns that he goes to the sieve of the sort of sacrificial process of his purification and being made into the Soma drink, um, and that he's described as a bull or a cow in different places, and so that whole process is heavily focused on, but there isn't actually a lot of narrative mythology other than the marriage hymn, which is so important, like I described. Um, Therefore, it can be difficult to find really strong parallels. But we have this figure named Chyavana, who seems to be, um, at least I would argue, he seems to be the an incarnation of the Soma type in sort of a legendary form. But really, under his mask, it is the god Soma. Um, so let me pull up our next document so I can quickly describe this parallel before we come to the end here. Okay, so this is from my book. Not super great resolution, but you can see here that we have the different branches, and if you look at Vedic, right in the center column, I have Soma Chyavana as sort of a combination here, and Soma's spouse is of course Surya, but Chyavana's spouse is this Sukanya. So this comes back to the question on the screen as well. there are many parts to this, but I'll try to corral this together to make it make sense. But this ties in with what is the Greek Aesir-Vanir War, which James Fields has asked. And so George Dumasil laid the foundation for this argument and this Chyavana connection. So it will be helpful if I quickly read his explanation of that. It is on page 139 of my book, in the in a footnote here, and I will quickly go through this because it will be really valuable for everyone to know. Okay, so this actually starts on page 138. So let's see, 59. So this story of Chyavana is found in Shatapatha Brahmana 4.1.5, and also the Mahabharata Vana Parva 122 through 125. And in order to win the okay. First of all, there is Chyavana. Chyavana is a sage who is meditating, and he's meditating for a long time, and Sukanya, a princess, comes along and throws um, throws something in his eye, apparently. But there are different versions, and in one version, playing youths throw a clod of dirt in his eyes. Um, I believe in one version, Sukanya, the princess herself, pokes him in the eye, and in another version, like with a stick or something, and in another version, playing youths throw a clod of dirt in his eye, and this, blinds him temporarily. And there has to be recompense done for this offense. The recompense of this offense is that the king, her father, offers to give her as his wife, as Chyavana's wife. So this draws us back to the marriage hymn of Soma, and I found this interesting because I only found one scholar who actually drew this connection that this is a legendary version of the Soma hymn, the Soma marriage. It was James Hewitt. Let me see here. James Francis Catharinus Hewitt in 1908. And he says, quote, "There is a variant of Chyavana's story in the Rig Veda, 10.85, 8 through 20. And that is the Surya's bridal hymn." He goes on, quote, "There the rejuvenated Chyavana is the moon god Soma, married to Surya, the sun maiden. The Ashvins assisted at their marriage. By this hymn, the Ashvins were summoned to the assembly of the gods," unquote. And so this is what draws these together, is the fact that after Chyavana is offered Sukanya for his bride, the Ashvins appear. They appear there as actually rival wooers for Sukanya, and they are trying to essentially woo her away. And so let me read. Let me go on here with my notes, because this is quite complex. But not only do we have this marriage between Chyavana, who's had his eye attacked, and the Sukanya. Sukanya actually appears to be, I think, the granddaughter or great granddaughter of Vivasvat, the sun. But then also, just like in the hymn, it says the Ashvins were there as wooers. So also the Ashvins appear here as actually rival wooers, and they also bring with them this herbal paste, which is a magical herbal paste that can rejuvenate and renew the youth even of the gods and of anyone. So let's see, right here it says when the Ashvins approach Sukanya, Sukanya makes a deal with them. she promises the Ashvins that if they will renew her husband's youth with this herbal paste, this magical renewal plant, then she and her husband will help the Ashvins gain access to the Soma sacrifice because they've been excluded. And this happens right before that, though. Let's see. I'm trying to remember why they do the choosing test, but in any case, yes, after the attempted wooing, the Ashvins make some kind of deal with Sukanya where she and Chyavana agree to undergo a choosing test. So they, as rival wooers, are there alongside Chyavana. They have just renewed the youth of Chyavana in this deal. And so he emerges from waters, having been washed with this herbal paste, and he looks now unrecognizable to his old self. Now he's renewed in youth, and he stands side by side with the Ashvins, and Sukanya has to choose her husband from among these three. So he, it's hard. In some sense, it's implied that it's hard for her to identify him, and he's just emerged from waters. But he chooses in this magical choosing test. She chooses Chyavana as her spouse from between them, and then Chyavana agrees to then help the Ashvins in turn. So it goes on from here. Dumasil further notes that let's see. In order to win the Ashvins their place in the sacrifice, the sage Chyavana takes it upon himself to aggressively confront Indra, who is here the king of the gods, to demand that they be admitted to the Soma sacrifice. He demands justice for the Ashvins. Indra disagrees powerfully, though, so then there has to be a sort of a fight between them has been stirred up. And Chyavana specifically uses magic. He ignores the rejection of Indra, and he creates. First of all, he magically paralyzes Indra. He uses magic to paralyze Indra, paralytic magic, and then he summons a great demon against Indra, which attacks Indra and makes him submit. Actually, it's so powerful. So clearly, Chyavana his magic is more powerful than the king of the gods here. He's being presented as this semi-divine or whatever. He's being presented as a legendary sage, but I think it's clear that he has to be a god in disguise, even though the story is not forthcoming about this, not telling us directly that this is Soma. But he is able to make the king of the gods submit in this brief battle. Dumasil further notes, as I say in my footnote, that the demon he creates is called Mada. The name Mada has the meaning drunkenness and comes from the same root as mead. So it is like an embodiment of the drunkenness caused by the mead itself. Why is this Chyavana creating this demon that embodies the drunkenness of the mead in some sense? And Dumasil says that this seems to parallel the creation of the Norse Kvasir, another being created by the gods in connection with a war where the chief gods are confronted by lower gods, and that Kvasir also being a living embodiment of the intoxicating mead. Dumasil says, quote, "This enormous monster's name is Mada, drunkenness. He is drunkenness personified. Even Indra gives in, peace is made, the Nasatya definitely join the divine community, and no allusion will ever be made to the distinction among gods or to the initial conflict. But what to do with this character, drunkenness, whose task is finished and who is now only dangerous? The one who created him this time with the accord of the gods cuts him into 4 pieces, and his unitary essence is split up into the 4 things that literally or figuratively are indeed intoxicating. Drink, women, gaming, and hunting. Certainly the differences between Germanic and Indic myth are striking, but so is the analogy between their fundamental situations and results." Here are the differences. Among the Germanic people, the character Kvas is formed after the piece is concluded as a symbol of that piece, and he is made according to a precise ritualistic technique, fermentation with spittle, whereas the character drunkenness is made as a weapon in order to force the gods into peace, and he is made mystically. We are in India by the force of asceticism, without reference to a technique of fermentation. Then, when Kvas is killed and his blood divided in thirds, it is not done by the gods who made him, but by two dwarfs, whereas in India it is his creator who, at the order of the gods, dismembers drunkenness into 4 parts. Further, the dismemberment of Kvas is simply quantitative into 3 homogeneous parts, 3 vessels receiving the blood, all the same value, whereas that of drunkenness is qualitative into differentiated parts, 4 sorts of drunkenness. In Germanic legend, it is simply a lying explanation that the dwarfs afterwards tell the gods of an intolerable force of a purely intellectual kind, out of proportion with the human world, which would have led to the suffocation of Kvas, whereas in the Indian legend, the excess of force, physical, brutal, of drunkenness is authentically intolerable, incomparable with the life of the world, and as such leads authentically to his being dismembered. Finally, the Germanic legend presents Kvas as a benefactor from the beginning, well disposed towards men, a sort of martyr, and his blood properly treated produces the most valued things. Whereas in India, drunkenness is a malefactor, a demonic figure, from the beginning, and his 4 fractions are the scourge of mankind. All this is true, but it would only prove, if there were need of it, that India is not Iceland, and that the 2 stories were told in civilizations not in content and form, that in content and form had developed in almost diametrically opposed directions. Okay, so in any case, the person thus made is killed and divided into 3 or 4 intoxicating parts in both stories that either aid or threaten men. The pattern is original, as Dumisil says. It is not met with anywhere in the world but in these 2 cases. So that's the end of the quote. And so I think that is just a powerful laying out of this, the basis of this connection, because we have the Ashvins aided by Chyavana, and they, in order to join the high sacrifice, the Soma sacrifice, that is the motivation, they have to confront the king of the gods. Chyavana is actually the dominant one who does the powerful attack using magic and makes the high god submit. And then there is even on top of that this creation of a being that embodies the potency of the intoxicating liquid and is divided into 3 versus 4 parts. So it's fascinating. This is the argument for what the Vedic Aesir-Vanir War actually is, right? So in the Aesir-Vanir War, though, we have the Vanir as a whole attacking the Aesir as a whole, but the chiefs among the Vanir are Njordur and his son Freyr, basically are the representatives. And so with this, Dumisil argues that Freyr and Njordur are probably the horse twins in some sense. And I think he was half right, essentially. Okay. So Freyr, the horse twins are quintessentially the young sons. They are youthful embodiments. And they are connected to horses. They have all these particular connections, as well as they have other qualities that I go into much more in depth in my book that show that we can see connect more strongly to Freyr. To fit this puzzle together, you could theorize that Njordur is the other horse twin. I just think that Dumisil was not really looking at the other possibilities in depth enough to who Njordur could parallel, because it seems more clear to me that Njordur parallels Chyavana. Chyavana is the chief actor in the war, in the battle, and Njordur is the elder one among the Vanir, holding a chief position there. And we see even in the Edda that the motivation of the Aesir-Vanir war seems to be that the Vanir are somehow seen as okay. This is an argument that I found in Ursula Dronka's reading of the Edda. So she is making this argument based on what she sees that there's a sort of underlying implication that the Vanir are not being given their part of the sacrifice with the other gods, which is exactly what we see with the Ashvins. So she says, let's see, if, as I understand it, the Aesir are faced with surrendering their monopoly of godhead and its revenues, sacrificial revenues, and joining with the all too popular Vanir, they are contemplating a very great loss in self-esteem and in wealth. If they do agree to share with the Vanir, then they must be all gods together, recognized as equally genuine gods to whom honor, that is, gildee, is due, partners in the divine guild and its sacred banquets, equally entitled to tribute. The poet plays on all the relevant senses of gildee noun and gilder adjective. The Aesir's only alternative to this unprofitable and demeaning share policy is to attack again, which they do. And that is in her Poetic Edda, Volume 2, page 134. You can read why she says that. Because of the use of the words hvart gjelda, and she says that's a legal term for tax or dues, but in colloquial idiom, afrad gjelda has become a proverbial phrase meaning to pay excessively. So anyways, there is an implication that the Aesir, the outcome of the Aesir-Vanir war is that this barrier between the Aesir and the Vanir kind of falls, and the Vanir are then allowed their part of this tribute, which is actually the tribute of the sacrifice. And that's exactly what the Ashvins are seeking in their war, where they confront the high god, aided by Chyavana. So it seems pretty clear that Chyavana has to be a god, and it seems clear that he parallels Njordr in some respect there. And then we have his marriage myth that I described, where he has his youth renewed and marries Chyavana, but he also has as rival wooers to his marriage, specifically the Ashvins. And he creates a being that is the embodiment of the Soma intoxication, and he is essentially, in this story, he is the gateway for the Ashvins to enter the Soma sacrifice itself, which is also telling. He ultimately is shown to have the power of who really enters and it gets admitted to the Soma sacrifice, because he creates that that opening for the Ashvins to join the Soma sacrifice. And all of this, I think, suggests that the marriage of Sukanya and Chyavana really is the legendary acting out of the Soma and Surya sacrifice, and that he really is Soma. Okay, so one thing that can sort of, there are multiple things that can confirm this when you parallel then Chyavana to Dionysus and to the Irish or the Celtic parallels, such as Mither. One thing I want to definitely touch on before we run out of time, unfortunately, and there's a possibility we could even do another stream on Soma, because I know there's a lot more that we wanted to go into. And each one thing leads to 100 other things that have to be explained in this topic, unfortunately. But the birth, what is fascinating when you lay all this out is that the birth stories of Chyavana and Dionysus actually have incredible, uncanny similarities. So as Josephus mentioned, Dionysus is the twice born, most famously, and in his birth, his mother is pregnant with him, and she wants to see Zeus, who has been the father, and she has this boon to wish from him any request, and she requests to see him. By seeing just the smallest part of him, aspect of him, she bursts into flames, and from the ashes, the baby Dionysus emerges, and then has to be sewn into the leg of Zeus. What is interesting is that the birth of Chyavana involves the same sort of motif. So he has a strange delivery as well. His name is called his name supposedly comes from a word, or rather, sorry, his birth is referred to as an early delivery, and therefore he gains the name Chyavana, related to early delivery or slipping out of the womb, because a Rakshasa demon tries to, I believe, tries to steal. Let's see. Oh yeah, okay. So a demon harasses the pregnant mother Puloma, and this causes the early delivery of the child Chyavana. But Chyavana's, it is actually the seeing the manifestation, the birth of Chyavana causes the demon to burst into flames and immediately turn to ash. So it is this exact same motif of right at the birth of this god, there is a bursting into flames by seeing. It is by seeing Chyavana in the Vedic version. It is by seeing Zeus in the other version, and there's a demon involved in Chyavana's story. But nonetheless, I think there's a lot there with this sort of interrupted birth that then becomes, a strange, unusual delivery, and also the bursting into flames of the unwise whoever happens to see the epiphany at this moment of birth. And of course, there are esoteric connections between Dionysus and Zeus himself. But I think you can kind of just see that there are enough of the same pieces that they're just shifted around a little bit, especially when you have these other underlying connections of Chyavana to Soma himself, and that Dionysus clearly himself is Soma. So I think that Dionysus story, to me, solidifies that Chyavana really is, primarily at least, a Soma incarnation. Okay, so maybe next time we could even go into Mither, because this goes back to Mither, who, once again, he starts his story by playing youths throw a sprig of hazel in his eye and blind him temporarily. And in recompense, he seeks out and is has to. The only thing that will make him feel better afterwards is that he marries the most beautiful woman in the realm, and he seeks out and finds Aideen, who then becomes, as I said, this solar bride of his, who transforms into a fly and is connected to the mead itself, and it's sort of a esoteric process of purification. So that then brings things together in a triangulation where you can really start to see the connections coming out between Chyavana and then finally to Mither. And I know that we can also go into more related to the Norse material. We have a lot of other material. So hopefully that's okay with you guys. Sorry that we kind of had too much overflowing in this episode. And is there anything you guys want to just say before we wrap things up that we can, anything to sum up, anything else you guys wanted to add for this episode? Yeah.
I mean, just a
Arno,
very
do you have
little.
anything you want to say, or do you want to save everything that you had prepared for a future?
I mean, we definitely will have to, I say, the important things
I
in
know.
a
Oh, I see. Arno had
in a
to
future live stream.
pop out actually. Didn't
Just
you?
a little note for the people who didn't know that.
Josephus, do you have anything?
Yeah, just a little note for people who didn't know that Bacchus is not the Roman name of Dionysus. Like, this is important to keep in mind. Bacchus is actually one of the many Greek names of this deity, who was then also borrowed by Romans. But the proper Roman name is Liber, Liber. So that's probably something that many people fail to keep in mind when discussing mythology, especially at an amateur level, and especially when they're not acquainted with the actual text. it's a very like little note, not really too important to our discourse, but maybe worth mentioning.
That's good. Yeah. All right. Well, then if there's nothing else, we can wrap up for today. And yeah, we can kind of discuss and see if we want to do more on this immediately or just in the future at some point. All right. Well, thanks, Josephus, and thanks, Arno, for being here as well and discussing in the comments and helping to answer questions there. Very, very helpful for the stream. And yeah, we'll see you guys next time. Thanks to everyone for watching.
Okay.
All
Have
right.
a good time.
Have a good one, Josephus. Okay. Bye.
Bye.